In the bleak midwinter, frosty wind made moan. Earth stood hard as iron, water like a stone. Snow has fallen, snow on snow, snow on snow. In the bleak midwinter, long ago. When winter closes in and the world grows quiet beneath snow and frost, stories change their shape. Across cultures and centuries, the cold has never been seen as empty or harmless, but as a season that brings something with it, something that waits in the forests, mountains, and the dark beyond the firelight. These are not the bright monsters of summer tales, but figures born from hunger, isolation, and the long nights when survival itself feels uncertain. In film and television, these ancient fears have returned wearing familiar faces, drawn from folklore and myth that long predate the screen. From creatures shaped by starvation to hosts of the dead that ride with the cold, and punishers that walk alongside winter celebration. These stories remind us that the most enduring monsters are those that arrive when the world freezes over. Tonight we're stepping into the snow to explore the winter creatures of film and television, and the older legends that gave them life, because long before cameras captured them, these monsters were already waiting in the dark, patient, hungry, and cold. When winter tightens its grip on the northern forests, and the snow grows deep enough to swallow roads, voices, and footsteps, there are places where the silence itself feels watchful. The Algonquin peoples believed that in these frozen stretches of land, something waited, patiently, moving through the trees with a hunger that could never be satisfied. This presence was not born a monster, but became one, shaped by starvation, isolation, and the slow collapse of human restraint. They called it the Wendigo. The Wendigo is said to emerge when a person trapped by winter and driven beyond desperation turns to cannibalism to survive. In that moment, the hunger changes its nature. What was once a need becomes an endless craving. The Wendigo is described as unnaturally tall and skeletal, its limbs stretched thin, its skin drawn tight. No matter how much it feeds, it never grows full, and the cold within it never eases. In the forests it hunts silently, lingering just beyond sight, watching rather than rushing. And some stories claim it can mimic human voices, calling out softly through the snow to lure the lost or the curious further from safety. Those who follow the sound rarely return, and when they do, the marks left behind suggest something more methodical than a wild animal, as though the hunger itself were intelligent and patient. What makes the Wendigo truly terrifying is that it is not only a creature of the woods, but a curse that can take root in the human mind. Survivors of encounters are said to feel the hunger creeping into their thoughts, a constant whisper that urges them toward the same choice that created the monster in the first place. In this way, the Wendigo spreads not through claws or teeth, but through fear and moral erosion, passing from one winter to the next. This idea of the Wendigo as both monster and transformation has made it especially haunting on screen, where its presence often reflects the darker edges of human nature, rather than simple physical horror. In the film Ravenous, the Wendigo is woven directly into a story of survival and cannibalism, where consuming others brings strength at the cost of the soul. The creature is not always seen, but its influence lingers over every choice, echoing the original folklore that warned against sacrificing humanity for survival. Television series like Hannibal take this concept even further, using the Wendigo as a symbolic figure that stalks the imagination rather than the forest. Here, the creature appears as an antlered spectre, representing predatory instinct and moral decay, a visual reminder that the line between human and monster is thinner than it appears. Though this form differs from traditional descriptions, the essence remains the same: transformation through hunger, obsession, and desire. More recent films such as Antlers return to the Wendigo to its winter setting, blending folklore with modern tragedy. In these portrayals, the creature is both a physical threat and a manifestation of generational suffering. Its endless hunger tied to neglect, abuse, and the slow collapse of communities left to freeze in isolation. The Wendigo does not simply arrive, it grows, fed by silence and abandonment. Across film and television, the Wendigo endures because it speaks to something deeply unsettling and universal. It reminds us that winter does not only test the body, but the mind, and that under enough pressure, the things we fear most may not come from the forest at all, but from the choices we make when hunger, cold, and desperation strips everything else away. And when the snow falls thick and the woods grow quiet, the old warning still lingers, whispered between trees and across screens alike. Beware the hunger that waits for you to break, because once the Wendigo is born, it will never stop feeding. In the farthest reaches of the frozen north, beyond the last fires of civilization, there are stories of a cold so deep it does not merely freeze the land, but steals breath, memory, and life itself. Long before the living fear the dark, they learn to fear the silence that follows a falling temperature, because when the cold arrives without wind or storm, it is said to bring something with it. In Game of Thrones, this terror takes the form of the White Walkers, beings who do not rush or rage but advance slowly and relentlessly, accompanied by frost and death. The White Walkers are not portrayed as mindless monsters, but as ancient figures tied to winter itself, emerging from a time before recorded history. Their arrival is always marked by unnatural cold, and where they pass, the dead rise to follow them, stripped of warmth, will, and humanity. They do not conquer with fire or steel, but with inevitability, embodying the fear that winter is not simply a season, but a force that cannot be reasoned with or stopped once it begins to move. This idea of death riding in with the cold has deep roots in European folklore, particularly in the legends of the Wild Hunt. Across Celtic and Norse traditions, the Wild Hunt is described as a ghostly procession that storms across the winter sky, led by a supernatural figure such as Odin or a spectral king, gathering the souls of the dead in its wake. Those who witness it are often doomed, either struck dead on the spot or carried away to join the hunt, a fate chillingly similar to the way the White Walkers swell their ranks with the fallen. In Norse myth, Odin himself is closely tied to this image, riding through winter storms at the head of the dead, cloaked, one-eyed and terrible. The howling winds of the Wild Hunt were said to be heard on the coldest nights, and to step outside during its passing was to risk being taken, frozen, or cursed. This connection between winter, death, and a relentless supernatural host echoes strongly in the White Walkers' slow march south, where every battle only makes them stronger. Celtic folklore offers its own chilling parallels, particularly in stories of the Slua, restless spirits of the unforgiven dead who travelled in great numbers, stealing souls and spreading death. These beings were often associated with cold winds, darkness, and the liminal spaces between worlds, much like the White Walkers themselves, who exist somewhere between life and death, neither fully alive nor entirely gone. Even the visual language of the White Walkers draws on older mythical imagery, with their pale skin, icy blue eyes, and weapons formed from frost, recalling the otherworldly beings of fairy lore, where creatures of the winter courts were beautiful, merciless, and utterly alien to human warmth. In these traditions, cold is not merely an absence of heat, but a presence in its own right, capable of thinking, choosing, and destroying. What makes the White Walkers so unsettling is not only their power but their patience. Like the Wild Hunt, they do not need to hurry because winter always comes eventually. Civilizations rise and fall, walls are built and broken, but the cold waits, unchanged, just beyond the firelight. This inevitability transforms the White Walkers from simple antagonists into embodiments of an ancient fear that has hunted human storytelling for centuries. In Game of Thrones, these myths are given flesh and movement, but the terror they represent is far older than television. They are the winter host, the dead who march when the world grows cold, and the reminder that long after swords rust and kings are forgotten, there will always be something waiting in the snow, patient and silent, ready to return when the cold grows deep enough to carry it south. When winter settles in and the nights stretch long and dark, there are parts of Europe where the season has never been gentle. Long before Christmas lights softened the cold and songs promised warmth and goodwill, the arrival of winter was marked by fear as much as celebration. In the alpine regions where snow could seal villages away for months at a time, people spoke of something that followed close behind the promise of festivity. A presence that arrived not with gifts, but with punishment. This presence was known as Krampus. Krampus is not a devil in the Christian sense, but a far older figure shaped by pre-Christian folklore and the harsh realities of winter survival. He is described as towering and bestial, with cloven hooves, matted fur and long twisted horns, carrying chains that rattle through the snow and a bundle of birch rods used to strike the wicked. In some tales he carries a sack or basket on his back, meant not for presents but for children who have failed to behave, who are dragged away into the mountains, never to return. Unlike many winter monsters, Krampus does not lurk unseen. He comes openly, walking the streets during the darkest nights of the year, when older things and old rules lose their strength. In this way, Krampus embodies the belief that winter is a time of judgment, when misbehaviour and selfishness threaten the survival of the whole community. His violence is not random, but ritualised, serving as a grim reminder that harmony and obedience were once matters of life and death. The roots of Krampus reach deep into pagan traditions, where horned figures represented the wild, untamed forces of nature that could not be controlled, only respected. As Christianity spread across Europe, these older spirits were not erased, but reshaped, absorbed into new traditions, as darker companions to St. Nicholas. Where St. Nicholas rewarded good behaviour, Krampus enforced the consequences, creating a balance that mirrored the precarious relationship between survival and scarcity during winter. This uneasy pairing has made Krampus a lasting figure in folklore, and one that has found new life in modern film and television. In contemporary portrayals such as the film Krampus from 2015, the creature returns as the manifestation of lost tradition and forgotten respect for winter's dangers. The story frames Krampus not merely as a monster, but as a response to modern complacency, punishing those who treat the season as harmless spectacle, rather than a time that once demanded reverence and restraint. Other adaptations lean more heavily into Krampus's monstrous aspects, emphasising his demonic appearance and brutal methods. Yet even these versions retain the core idea that he is not simply evil, but corrective. He arrives when rules are broken, when behaviour threatens the fragile balance that allows communities to endure the cold months. In this sense, Krampus functions less like a villain and more like a dark enforcer of tradition, a reminder that celebration without responsibility once came at a terrible cost. What makes Krampus particularly unsettling is the way he blurs the boundary between joy and terror. He appears alongside bells, lights, and songs, turning familiar comforts into uneasy disguises. The sound of chains echoing through snow-covered streets, the image of a horned figure moving through lamplit villages, and the knowledge that judgment may arrive at any moment, all tap into a deeper fear. That beneath winter's festivities lies a memory of hardship that has never truly gone away. Across folklore and modern media alike, Krampus endures because he represents the shadow side of winter celebration, the part that remembers hunger, discipline, and survival. He walks with Christmas, not to destroy it, but to remind those who forget that winter was once unforgiving, and that the monsters of the season are born not only from imagination, but from the realities people once faced when the cold ruled everything.